Hello and welcome to FEMTECH Live Lounge, a monthly discussion that celebrates the intersection of technology and the AI industry. This series is presented by Virtual Patent Gateway. Our guest interviewer today is Shawnna Hoffman. Shawnna is president of Guardrail Technologies, a leading tech company focused on enabling responsible technology. She previously served as the Chief Technology Leader, Legal Strategy and Operations of Dell Technologies, and is a sought-after artificial intelligence and blockchain subject matter expert who has spoken at the United Nations at Blockchain for Impact and the UN Data Forum. Shawnna is joined by Theresa Weisenberger, an intellectual property and technology partner and co-lead of the AI team at Baker Hostetler. And with that, I'll pass things over to Shawnna.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And I'm thrilled to be here today with one of my favorite people, Theresa. And I'd love to expand on her background just a little bit because I tell you, you have had an amazing decade plus as you've been in the thick of so much of this. So Theresa is an intellectual property and technology partner, and she co-leads the AI team at Baker Hostetler. Her practice focuses on patent and copyright law in the fields of electrical engineering and computer science. Drawing on her decade of experience in intellectual property litigation, technology transactions, copyright registration, and patent prosecution, she represents both established technology companies and those companies undergoing a digital transformation at every stage of the intellectual property lifecycle. So, Theresa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We have not enough time to talk about the many things that you and I have been discussing over the past few weeks. As we have embarked now on the fifth industrial revolution, I think, there's a little back and forth as to when this started, but it definitely is within the past 2 years. We are on the cusp of digital transformation. So over the past decade, what you've seen, especially on the legal side, and how things have expanded over the past few years.
Yeah, so the digital transformation stuff, I think, is the most interesting part of my practice. So, my practice originally focused on clients that they already considered themselves tech companies in some form or fashion. But with digital transformation, I've had clients come to me that didn't traditionally think of themselves as a tech company, and a company you wouldn't think of as being high tech either, realizing that they're either sitting on all this data that can be used to create technology, or the technology that they've developed in-house to make their jobs easier is something that they can offer externally. And so it really does shuffle up the relationship. Sometimes your competitors become your customers, your vendors become your competitors, and helping clients navigate that in a temperate way is one of my favorite things to do. So especially coming from a patent background, my gut reaction used to be, I want to patent all the inventions. And we really do take a deeper look at whether that makes sense for a particular client, for a particular use case, because as our clients are very well aware, patenting is a time-intensive and cost-intensive process. And so figuring out a way where we actually provide and add value from our services is a big part of digital transformation. And the other big part of it is education. So I love speaking on IP law in general and, what to watch out for, especially in the AI space. And a lot of what I do is not just educate externally, but I set up programs to help clients educate their internal workforce or their vendors about these issues and what approach my client specifically wants to take with them.
Yeah, and I love all the work that you're doing, and you are definitely spot on with what I've been hearing from so many of the AI leaders. I just walked out of an AI leadership conference here in Washington, D.C., and everything you just said, I literally heard from so many of the big techs. I think that what's not being talked about right now, and is something I'd love to really have insights available for our audience, is what's going on with case law? What are we seeing? We've seen really funny things things that are funny, not at the moment weren't funny.
Right.
Let's jump into a few of those that you've seen and those lessons learned.
Okay, so it's been really interesting. I started following the AI copyright cases when there were about 2 or 3 of them across the U.S. And so I set up what I call my AI case tracker, and I'll share it just a second. So
please do. Oh my goodness. So you have a place where you have put all of these together. Awesome.
Yeah. So this started as a small project. Like I said, there were 2 or 3 cases. GitHub was one of the first technologies to be accused of copyright infringement for building AI off of scraped content, public scraped content. there was a Thomson Reuters case that predates that one as well. But what started as tracking 2 or 3 cases ended up becoming what's over a dozen cases now, which is what I'm showing right here. And what I've been doing is for each case, like I have an overview, but then I'm also providing updates. And one of the reasons why my clients have found this so helpful is we want to know how these legal theories are developing. It's going to take a while for them to get up to the appellate level or for legislation to address them. So we're really having to take a lot of guidance from the decisions on motions to dismiss in a lot of these cases. So my clients and everybody can go to bakerlaw.com/AI case tracker. You can find these pages that we keep up to date on each of these cases. And then if you want to download the pleadings themselves and really get into the weeds, you're welcome to download those as well from right there.
That is excellent. Well, and can you highlight a couple cases that, might be of interest to those who are here, maybe those lessons learned?
Yeah, so one of the theories that was proposed, I think the first case to set it out was the Anderson versus Stability AI case. And this one deals with generative AI that's making visual content. And the theory that the content owners proposed was that every output of generative AI is an infringing derivative work of every input that was used to train the AI technology. And at first, I think a lot of clients and other stakeholders very nervous about, how can you use this technology if you're going to get accused of infringement every time you use it, no matter what your output looks like or how similar it is to the content on which it was trained. And right now, the Northern District of California has struck down that theory that you can't ignore the substantial similarity test. So if you're using Midjourney and you create an output that looks nothing like my painting, but my painting was used to train that tool, are you as the end user liable for copyright infringement? And the answer, which I don't think is a surprise to people who are looking at it purely from a legal perspective, but the answer is no, that's not infringement. But you talk to a lot of content owners and there is such a personal connection to the content that they're making. And they feel that this technology is benefiting off of their hard work without giving them any type of credit, and trying to figure out, well, whether something is fair or whether something is advisable from a business perspective is a different question than whether it's allowed under the law. And I think we're seeing companies struggle with both. The law is undeveloped in some of these areas, but in others, like I talked about with the derivative work issue, I think we're seeing at least some type of consensus from the early decisions. But just because it's permitted, does a client want to use that technology in a particular way is often a different question. So these case trackers give us a good opportunity to start those conversations with our clients and figure out, where their risk tolerance is, not just from a legal perspective, but from a publicity perspective as well. So one of the things you see in the headlines all the time now is AI tools going rogue, and it ends up with bad publicity for companies that their AI chatbot goes rogue and starts, disparaging the company itself, or the tool offers, somebody was able to purchase a truck for $1 because the AI tool malfunctioned. And so for some of these things, it's reputational almost more so than it is legal at this point.
Absolutely. So we moved in general from the deterministic systems of old, even just a few years ago, to where we would figure out about 800 answers that the AI bot could use. And then it was more the question coming in from the human would be fit into those answers. A little frustrating, actually sometimes very frustrating, to the systems of today. And I'm saying today because it's just the past 2 years, really, with the proliferation of ChatGPT and other large language models, so Gen AI. We're seeing a probabilistic model, but then we also have still the issue of it probably giving you the correct answer. So it still will have the hallucinations, and that's just inherent in a probabilistic model. There's no way to correct it. I was talking to somebody earlier today. They're like, oh, you just filter that out. No, that's not really how it's going to work. No. So there's a lot of floating ideas out there in regards to how you manage this technology, and it's definitely a challenge. The chatbot that sold the car for $1, the question that occurred with that was the chatbot asked the individual, how much would you pay for a car? Now, every sales reps would do that. How much would you pay for it? It said $1. The human says $1. It's okay, sold. So it's that misunderstanding. So with some of the cases that you've seen, what are some of these lessons learned? Like, that's a hard lesson to learn. What lessons learned have you been seeing?
That is a hard lesson to learn, although I think that for a dealership, losing one car is not the worst thing that could have happened. I mean, we've seen this with retail websites before where like Walmart.com misprices something and there's a mad dash for everybody to buy a $15 big screen television. I think some of the lessons that I'm hoping my clients are learning is just that what the limitations are of the technology and what the downstream implications of that are. And that's where being a lawyer comes in handy, because we're designed to issue spot. I've trained to think about what is the worst thing that could possibly happen from this. And so you really do want to kind of interrogate whatever use case you're planning and think about how could it get messed up by human error? How can somebody misuse the technology intentionally? And then what is the downstream liability for that? And that is something that comes up in the context of my AI policy guide. If that's okay, I'll pop this up.
I would love to talk about policy, because that's been really on the forefront of every discussion I've been in here in Washington, D.C. It's how do we put policies and procedures around something that is so, it's changing. Every moment, probably has changed 10 times since we started. New technologies coming out. So excellent. Yes, definitely jump into this.
Okay, so when generative AI really became popular, was it not last November, but the November before, we had a lot of people asking for just like a template AI policy. Can you just give me like a standard policy that I can deploy? And what I wanted to say was like, that's not how any of this stuff works. Like, you can't have this one size fits all approach to it. And instead of talking like that to my clients, I came up with this. Basically, it's a policy guide. It helps you figure out what questions to ask so that you can figure out how to design a policy for your specific approach. We look at like 3 different questions. One of them is like what the type of AI is. Like you said earlier, when you're talking about deterministic AI technology, the ways that technology can be used or the way that it can malfunction is going to be a lot different than when we're talking about generative AI, for example. And then we talk about exactly how that technology is being deployed within your organization. And different departments have different risks, right? So one of the places that we see generative AI being used the most is in engineering, or we're talking about using code generating tools. The risk of using generative AI to help a developer write computer code is going to be a lot different than the risk profile of using AI to interact with patients of healthcare facilities and giving advice, maybe not healthcare advice, but giving healthcare adjacent advice with those tools. And so the last question I ask, and this is my favorite one, and when I designed this continuum, I felt like I was making like a giant like conspiracy theory murder board with like strings attached. But if you think about AI as an ecosystem, you've got people on the far left are the data providers. And this is the content that's used to actually build the AI technology. Then you have the foundation architects. So that's where you think of like the large language models and the other foundation models. The technology deployers are the ones that are actually making the technology usable, right? So the foundation model is a foundation, but you need some way to access or interface with that. And that's what they're doing. And then where a lot of my clients fall is just in the end user category, right? So for different applications and for different use cases, my clients will fit into more than one of these categories. For example, if I have a client that is fine-tuning their model so that they can provide an application that is customer facing, they're both a data provider in that context and they're a technology deployer. And I basically lay out the questions to ask, right? When you're thinking about what the legal risks are, what guardrails we should be designing around different use cases, going through these lists of questions and figuring out how they affect you based on where you sit is really important. The questions change, right, depending on where you are in that continuum. So use restrictions is something I think about a lot, because if you're talking about a broad data set, a lot of times large language models want to license a data set for a broad use case, right? They're going to build an AI, they're going to build some kind of AI application off of it, a general purpose model. And so figuring out what type of downstream use you're comfortable with as a data set provider is really challenging, because ChatGPT sits as a foundation for all types of specialized AI tools. And once you're licensing the data to the foundation model, you're at risk of losing control over how that data is used. And if you go further downstream, right to the end user, like high risk uses are a much bigger concern. So I've talked a little bit about use of AI tools in healthcare situations. We've also seen it in construction as well. And so if you're providing some type of advice or resources around building a home, whether you have like designs or whatever, the high risk use case comes into play if we're talking about structural advice, right? And so figuring out what your tolerance is for whether the tool advises on, the size of the 2x4, I guess 2x4s are all the same size, but the size of the wood that you're using to build a frame is a much higher risk use case than a tool that is recommending paint colors. And these are all different types of uses that our clients are considering. And sometimes the high risk use case is worth that risk. And we help build in guardrails about how we use it and how we monitor it to mitigate those risks as much as possible.
Yeah, so what I love about what you've built here is you're thinking through the risks that honestly humans don't typically think would be a risk. Like the size of a board. I was on the AI ethics committee at IBM, and then we also started one at Dell. And the IT teams often were going, ooh, it's cool, let's invent this, but not thinking through can I do it? Well, yes, of course you can. You're brilliant. But should I do it? And what are all of the societal, the good, the bad, the ugly with that?
Right. And that's something that we've seen the EU AI Act focus on a little bit more than legislation in the United States. They're a little bit ahead of us on that, but they're asking those big questions. But sometimes like the high risk use cases are really obvious. Like one of the big high risk use cases that gets brought up all the time is the use of AI in war or in different types of weaponry. Those are the easy ones to detect. Like this could be a problem with the AI malfunctions. But like you said, the high risk use cases kind of pop up everywhere. And I think the best way to think about it is when you have a human that is providing that type of advice or information, whether it's to a customer or internally, you rely on that person's expertise. AI doesn't quite have that level of expertise or that check that humans do. So I like to compare it to a really junior first year associate. So when I use AI technology in the context of legal services, I'll look at it, I'll consider it, but I'm definitely going to double check it. And that's where you can avoid some of the more embarrassing headlines, like the attorneys that filed briefs that were written with AI that cited to non-existent precedent. And so I think remembering how much human check you have at different steps along the way is really important.
So one of the foundations of our company, and if you look at our website, we are guardrails, but our goal is to keep humans in the loop. And right now, that is extremely important. And I even heard that from one of the general counsel members at Google today, and he said the use cases, everyone keeps on talking about replacing the human, but we really do need to start focusing on how can we instead augment the human? How can we enhance our knowledge? Because we have an opportunity to become smarter. So again, it's keeping the humans in the loop, which is our focus. But what I love about what you just said is, again, it's that human side of things where we can see things that others can't, and that no AI system can, especially if you're a specialist in the area.
Right. Like I look forward to AI technology being able to diagnose, like evaluate my skin and look for skin cancer.
Oh, I agree.
Because I think it's going to make healthcare a lot more accessible. But at the same time, I want a doctor double checking to make sure that advice is consistent with their professional opinion as well. And we saw that that's become a problem in the insurance industry, where there's two big lawsuits against insurance providers where they used AI to decide whether to grant coverage or not for certain procedures. And according to the allegations, there was no human in that loop. My human doctor recommended I get this procedure. This AI technology is telling me that I don't need it, and there's no check on that. The AI can't be the final decider of that. And that's where I think that human element does become really important.
Oh, that is so well said. In our last couple minutes, I'd love to just mention to those who are listening, if you have any questions, go ahead and, type in your messages. We'd love to chat back and forth a little bit with you. Of course, even afterwards, Theresa and I are always available through LinkedIn or other, means to contact us directly. So I think that would be very good. Theresa, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I do want to add before we go that what I've described here is my opinions only. They don't represent the opinions of my firm or my clients, and it also does not constitute legal advice. So, like I said earlier, how important it is to have a human provide a specific review of whatever advice you're getting. I think that is also true for law. So while we talk about this stuff generally, figuring out how it specifically impacts your use case does require a one-on-one approach.
Well, and as a really good reminder, AI is only surface deep. And again, the systems that are out there have been trained by a lot of data. They also are probabilistic systems. So again, it's probably going to be right. I have another friend of mine who's an attorney, and we were on looking at one of the legal research programs, and the sales rep said, "Oh, it doesn't hallucinate." Well, I swear to you, within 2 minutes, my friend had asked a question. She's, like you, an expert in the area. The response back was, again, only surface deep. So if someone had just taken that response, they missed 90% of what really need to have happened to help that case move forward. So that's what she was very disappointed in. She's like, it's a good start for our first year associates again, but it's not something that an expert like you or her would feel comfortable with having as a full response.
Now, I like to compare it to the way we thought about the internet 15 or 20 years ago, right? You weren't allowed to cite an internet, a web page as a source for your research papers because the internet was completely untrustworthy. And what we've seen happen over the past 20 years is that we've become sophisticated users of the internet, and we have, developed our trust in certain aspects of it. And I think that's what we're going to see with AI technology as well.
Yeah.
My AI case tracker, Ashley, it's bakerlaw.com/AI case tracker.
Yeah, and I have found what you have built here just extremely valuable. And I'd love to see more people, looking at it, being a part of the program. I'm sure they could even email you with any questions that they have or, call you directly. So in our last minute, I'd just love to say thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And any last parting words of wisdom?
I want to thank you, Shawnna. It's been great getting to know you through this process, and I hope that we continue to stay in contact. But I guess as a parting word, I think that these issues are so complicated and underdeveloped that talking through them and brainstorming is so important at this stage that I encourage everybody to continue to have these types of conversations or, monitor other thought leaders in this area, because nobody knows the answer yet, but I think we'll come to it together, hopefully.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you. I think we are out of time. So I look forward to our next discussion. I think we're going to be back live again in July and dig in deeper into some of the more exciting things and talk about what the updates are. I mean, almost every day I'm seeing lessons learned in AI. So I'd love to get your perspective on that too. So thank you, VPG, for having us here today at the FEMTECH Live Lounge. And Ashley Chong, you and your team, Caitlin, have been just a valuable resource for women and for anyone interested in AI in the industry. So thank you.
Thanks, Shawnna.